From the United Nations Office to the African Union, this is She Stands for Peace, a podcast series where I explore the state of the women, peace and security agenda in Africa through a series of conversations with key actors. In the podcast, we ask the central question, 20 years after UNSCR 1325, how far have we come? I'm Dr. Yemisi Akimobola, your host, and today I'm joined by Mr. Andre Mundal, Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security at the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have a conversation about member states' commitment to implementing the Women, Peace and Security agenda. So, Mr. Andre Mundal, it's a pleasure to speak with you today. Now, you bring something very interesting to your role as Special Representative of Women, Peace and Security, in that you've got a background in the Norwegian Armed Forces. You also worked in the military academy to train officers to leadership. So you've brought about 12 years or so military experience to your role as a diplomat. Tell us about that transition from armed forces to diplomacy.
Nice to meet you, and thank you for having me here. So, I spent 12 years in the army before joining foreign service, and I guess it's not the most normal way to enter a foreign service, but it happens. On the women, peace, and security agenda, I wish I could say that I knew about this issue to the extent that I should when I was working in the army. But in all honesty, I have to say that I think it's more about later realizing all the things that I did not know, which is an important judgment to make as well, I think. But one takeaway that I do bring with me is that, the army is a place where you really get to test yourself and your limits. I remember when we have conscription in Norway, so I was going to do my year in the army, and I got this leaflet in the mail from this ranger battalion up in northern Norway towards the Russian border. I remember in this leaflet there was a graph, and just like a stock graph, and it had 4 different levels. And the first was like what your mom and dad think that you can do. Above that one was what you think you can do, basically saying that you think you can do a little bit more than what your mom and dad think you can do. And above that again was what your officers in the army will think that you can do. And at the very top was what you can actually do. I didn't really get it at the time, but later what I experienced in the army, which I think it's what the armed forces does well, is that they challenge you. And I have always had a keen interest in people that overcame immense hardship, whether we're talking about explorers, prisoners of war, or people that for some reason have all the odds stacked against them and they still came out on top through grit and determination. And that's where women peace builders come in, right? Because forget about Superman and forget about the Avengers. I mean, these are superheroes. They don't have to fear much, but imagine women peace builders on their own in a country. Most of them don't have some network to tap into, and they have everything stacked against them. Often it's culture, it's laws, it's religion, and still they just wake up every day and they have to take care of families and food and everything, and still in some way work to promote peace with all the risk that comes with it. I'm just very fascinated, inspired, and impressed by all of these women. And I think my experience from the army, also having worked in missions abroad, gives me a certain perspective on what that type of risk and sacrifice is. I'm a man and I've been in the army and all of that, but I don't see myself reaching most of these women to the knees. So very impressed by that. And I just want to say also in terms of implementation of this agenda, which is something that we focus very much on in Norway, I guess I bring with me the mission focus, the operative focus that I also learned in the army, because at this point in time, we have about 100 national action plans for women, peace and security worldwide. And Africa is at the forefront in having plans, with more than 50% of the countries in Africa having such plans. But what we really lack is implementation. So, I focus very much on how to operationalize it.
So, speaking on implementation now, in your role as Special Representative of Women, Peace and Security, you're just a couple of months in that role. So, in what ways would you say that the field experiences that you've talked about already has shaped the view that you have on implementation of WPS agenda?
I would say that at the core of my view is focus, and that it's better to be effective in doing three things fully than to fail at doing 10. And I think that is important part to bring with you, because it's the women, peace and security agenda is a broad agenda. It is difficult. If it wasn't difficult, everyone would succeed. So in my case, it's better for me that 80% of my colleagues do a fairly good job on women, peace and security than 5% of them doing an excellent job, right? So in Norwegian Foreign Service, I see myself as sort of a cheerleader of sorts, right? My job is to make it easy for my colleagues to succeed as well. So we have this plan, and I could be solving this with running around in different offices and showing them this is the plan, find your angle. But instead, I try to operationalize it to the extent that what are you going to do when you are on a certain regional desk in the ministry or at an embassy? What is your deliverable? Clear priorities, one step at a time. Are we talking about a specific gender advisor in a certain mission? Is it something funding related? Getting down to the nitty gritty. And I think that is very important, because what we need to do with this agenda is to bring the people that are not on board, right? We need to talk to the ones that do not really know what it is yet. And in order to get there, we need to make it understandable, operationalize it for them specifically.
I'm going to speak more broadly now about Norway as a country. At the start of 2021, Norway joined the UN Security Council. And as a member of the Security Council, Norway chairs a variety of key positions, including several sanctioning committees, the Working Group on Children and Armed Conflict. So these positions really place your country in a position of responsibility where international peace and security is concerned. And I also note that the connection between climate change and security is particularly important to Norway. So, speaking from your perspective as Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security, what are some of the ways in which climate change impacts the WPS agenda?
As an elected member of the UN Security Council, so women, peace, and security is one of our key priorities. And, mandates and resolutions have operative implications for people on the ground. And we work to see women's rights, needs, and priorities reflected in the Security Council work. And women must be engaged in our missions. And in climate change specifically, we know that climate change is a major driver of inequality, insecurity, and conflict. Large scale displacement of people, competition over resources, and food insecurity are examples of this. Extreme weather events like droughts and floods destroy homes, livelihood, and communities. And in countries where people are dependent on agriculture or other climate sensitive natural resources for their livelihood, women are more likely to be affected by changing weather patterns and climate shocks. Women often run households and therefore rely heavily on natural resources. We also know that research demonstrates how women are often worst hit by climate-related forced displacement. For example, women displaced by disasters face an increased risk of gender-based violence and have less access to relief resources. Refugee girls are half as likely to be in school as refugee boys. Climate change's impact could further amplify disruption in girls' access to education, impacting lifelong opportunities and the status of women globally. So there are numerous ways in which climate security and women, peace, and security interlinks.
And so, what should member states be doing to address these issues?
In the Security Council, we work to see women, peace, and security operationalized in Council's product as much as possible. And this is the same with the issue of climate and women, peace, and security. And of course, one thing is what you see coming out of the council at any given time. But of course, for us, it's continuous work behind the scenes in order to progress on this agenda. And I think one thing that we find it's a tricky issue with the women, peace, and security agenda is women are victims for so many reasons, climate being one of them. But in general, in terms of culture and laws, and women are being held back for so many reasons, and you have gender-based violence. And but the problem is that we need to focus on the victim part at the same time as for Norway. It's important to recognize women as actors, and this is sometimes a bit of a dilemma, right? Because what we really want to spend time talking about is women as actors. And the ask that women have in terms of meaningful and equal participation, it's a really low ask. Women want to be part of decision making of their own future, which should of course be the floor of access that women should have. But sometimes it is a dilemma that women as victims becomes a sort of a forefront issue, that it hinders more fruitful talk of women as actors, which they really are.
I'm going to expand a little bit more on what you said there around women's participation. And also, you've talked about national action plans. So let's explore that a little further. Norway is on its third year of its current national action plan, which will be your fourth national action plan. And I noticed that in the context of Africa, Nigeria, South Sudan, and Mali are the countries that you've described in the Norwegian National Action Plan as priority countries for you. In South Sudan, you've worked with several partners in supporting women's participation in the peace process and political life. And it's one of the countries described in your National Action Plan as countries where Norway has a special responsibility and opportunity to contribute. So now the situation in South Sudan is that the peace agreement is very fragile. It's there, but it's fragile. And also that the statistics around kidnapping of women and girls is quite frightening. So in the context of women participation, then, how effective do you feel that Norway has been in meeting that objective of increasing women's participation in the country?
Well, you point to it yourself as well, right? The parties to the conflict signed a revitalized peace agreement in September 2018 with an objective to form a government in May 2019. And then the pre-transitional period was later extended several times until February of last year, when the government and national unity was finally formed. And one woman was appointed among the 5 presidents in government. And the provisions in the agreement are currently being implemented, albeit slowly. Cooperation with local and regional partners to strengthen women's participation in the peace negotiations leading up to the peace agreement contributed to the agreement that 35% of women's representation in all mechanisms, bodies, and institutions. However, due to political and societal reasons, there is still a long way to go before women fulfill the 35% in all mechanisms. And, we work in many different ways to help achieving this aim, of course. But in terms of us implementing our own national plan in Norway, right, there is nothing that can substitute political will. We can be engaged, we can push, we can help, but we can never replace something as that's where you would find the real energy, right? So you need absolutely need that in place, and then you need effective follow-up of the plan. And I think for us, like I say, it's not like the Norwegian government woke up one day in the 70s and decided to make gender equality the most important thing going forward, right? We had a thriving civil society that was pushing for this all along. So for Norway, it is very important to be working with civil society and to be engaged with them, because they do play a key role in holding government accountable, pushing for the implementation of really aims that have already been set.
And for Nigeria and Mali, you identified these two countries as potential environments for new learning and new types of cooperation. So now both countries are experiencing escalating levels of conflict. In Nigeria, we're seeing an increase in violent terrorism, kidnappings, killings by herder communities. And it's a similar situation in Mali, where herder communities decreasing access and control of land is leading to insecurity. And both countries are experiencing youth unemployment, the movement of small arms, and there's also that connection, as you said earlier on, with climate change in Mali's insecurity in particular. So in the context of member states' commitment to implementing WPS, Women's Peace and Security, what might we do differently in countries like Nigeria and Mali, where military intervention is not necessarily what is needed?
Like you said, we are on our fourth national action plan in Norway, and this is a continuous learning process, which is why we have such a strong focus on clear indicators in our national action plans, and then also on reporting, right? Because then we get to see what we need to change and what we can bring with us going forward. For example, going into our fourth national action plan, a key takeaway from our third was the need for early process, for example, because we saw that we need to already be engaged at the time where there is a process, because it's often too late to start pushing this issue when such a process starts. But so Nigeria launched its second national action plan in 2017, and state action plans are finalized in 11 of the 36 states now. And additional 3 states will launch their plans this year. And just like you said, in Nigeria, there are multiple security challenges, includes conflict between herders and farmers in the Middle Belt, ethnic clashes and conflict over land and oil resources in the south, terrorist insurgency in the northeast, and violence and conflict is increasing in the northwest. And women in Nigeria faces a number of barriers to leadership and decision making, including cultural and traditional beliefs and practices. And Nigeria also has a low representation of women in parliament in relation to other countries in Africa. And of course, with Boko Haram making attacks on women's rights and security part of their strategy. But women are also recruited and perform violent acts and put pressure on others to take part in violent extremism as well. So it's an extremely complicated country to work in, and on this agenda, and partners in Nigeria are working to develop early warning mechanisms to prevent conflict. And sometimes women have information that can provide early warning of conflict or impending violence. In other situations, women don't have access to information, while men do. And this can lead to men leaving certain areas, while women are behind and are at a higher risk of sexual and other kinds of abuse, which further impedes and delays their ability to get away. So this is the complicated situation that we work in. And of course, it's our embassy and our regional desk that are mostly engaged at a detail level, but we are always looking to develop our strategy and partner with other countries in the region to do so as well.
One of the things that I noticed about your national action plan was that it had a very clear implementation monitoring framework at the end, ways in which you're going to measure success. And not many national action plans, particularly in Africa, have those framework of measurements. What are your reflections on that in terms of how we should be measuring implementation leading to success?
As I said earlier, it's great that we have as many national action plans as we do have today worldwide. But then again, we need to realize that the plan without proper indicators and proper implementation is just a piece of paper. So, this is where the real work begins. And having clear indicators is not as interesting and motivating work as having a great plan to make something happen, but it's the indicators that really can hold you accountable to your plan and also to tell you if you are succeeding or not. And this is basically an issue of how to formulate aims in a way that you can actually see if you succeeded. Like a typical way that this will be described in a plan is that you will become better at something. But how do you really know that you have become better at anything at all if you don't have a clear indicator to measure that success? So the real work of the Norwegian National Action Plan for Women, Peace, and Security lies in formulating these indicators and the yearly reporting. And this is the way that I, as a special representative, can hold the whole system accountable to what we have said that we have achieved, because we have 5 ministries involved in the plan, 5 ministers signed the plan, and 5 ministries also report on the plan. And if it wasn't for the indicators and the reporting, I wouldn't really have a tool to make implementation happen. I would have a plan that I could try to wave in front of people's faces, but in terms of there not being a framework of success, I wouldn't be able to make it happen. So it is really the key.
And one of the things you mentioned earlier on was that you wish there was more kind of media engagement in the WPS agenda in 1325. So what are your reflections in terms of current ways in which media cover 1325 WPS and what you see as the real potential impact for increasing media coverage in terms of countries and impact on politicians to act?
It's interesting how in today's world we have access to more information than ever before, right? Also through social media and everything, but that is also a sign of increased competition, right? So it's very hard to get traction in this enormous, complicated space of media, but it is so important because what will ultimately give the women, peace, and security agenda traction is for us to have more people engaged on this agenda, to know what the risk of lack of implementation is, so that through increased knowledge among our peoples, there is also more accountability for political leaders that have said that they are going to achieve something. It's again back to accountability, right? In my system, I can play that role as a special representative, but there wouldn't be a role to play if we didn't have the Norwegian media giving attention to this issue and having civil society giving attention to this issue. And I think we need to find ways in order to increase the media attention of this issue that is already so important, but for some reason is lagging behind on attention. It's also misunderstood that this is an agenda for women. Of course, it's an agenda that address the needs of women because they are not given a seat at the table where decisions are taken. But one thing that both men and women have to understand, and I would say particularly men, this is an agenda for society. This is an agenda that also benefits me as a man. And I think that is often lost in the translation. And we need to engage men more on this issue, particularly because of in the current state of affairs, men hold more power than women globally, and we need to talk to power. We need to have more men understand that by fighting for this agenda, you're also fighting for you're fighting for your family, and you're fighting for the future of your society.
So, in terms of the United Nations Office to the African Union, what has been the kind of relationship there, and how important is that relationship to your agenda in Africa?
Well, the African Union has over the last years had a greater focus on gender equality with the work of Women and Gender Development Directorate, the Special Envoy for Women, Peace and Security, in addition to Women, Gender, the Peace and Security Program, and also the African Women Mediators Network, FemVoice Africa, are central. Several guidelines have been developed, and the African Union promotes gender equality and facilitates this work through the Commission. Our AU delegation cooperates with the African Union at several levels on women, peace and security. And Norway has supported African Union Special Envoy for Women, Peace and Security since 2015. And in 2019 and 2020, supported a deployment of FemVoice members to Sudan, South Sudan, and the AU Commission in Addis Ababa. In addition to that, we financially supported the development of the Continental Results Framework, which is currently being used to monitor and report on the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda in Africa. We also have a partnership with UN Office to the African Union with Women, Peace and Security as one of the priority areas. I think we should give particular credit to the growing number of women mediated from the FemVoice Africa network that have been trained and deployed to various field missions. Similarly, the network of African women leaders that aims to scale up women's voices and enhance women's leadership in the transformation of the continent. And African women peace builders have a wealth of experiences from the grassroots level engagement and traditional mediation methods that need to be considered and reflected while designing peace processes, policies and responses to realize sustainable and long-lasting peace. I think also the media should also play a bigger role in showcasing women peace builders' important contribution. So we work very closely with the African Union and particularly on the women peace and security agenda.
My last question is going to be in relation to this current state of the world in terms of the pandemic. And in relation to the size of your economy, Norway is the second largest donor among OECD countries, and you commit 1% of your gross national income to official development assistance. And despite the COVID-19 pandemic, you're still being able to honor that commitment. But it's not the same for other countries. So, for example, in the UK, they're cutting the commitment from 0.7% of their gross national income to 0.5%. And that was the cut that they made this year. How can you sum up the impact of such drastic cuts on development objectives like the WPS agenda to the wider global effort? And what message would you like to pass on to other countries making such cuts to international development?
In terms of COVID-19, we know that the impacts globally have been enormous in a negative way. At the end of 2020, 270 million people worldwide suffer from acute food insecurity, and this is a 100% increase from 2019. And in 2019, more than 700 million people lived in extreme poverty, and it was estimated that due to the pandemic, an additional 143 million, up to 163 million, can end up living in extreme poverty in 2021, reversing the trend since the adoption of the Agenda 2030. And COVID-19 is also widening the gender gap. The feminization of poverty grows deeper and reduces women and girls' access to school, healthcare, and also the labor market, both in the immediate and in the longer term. And COVID-19 is putting the progress for girls worldwide in peril. It was anticipated that 12 million girls were forced into marriage in 2020, and Save the Children reports that a dramatic surge in child marriage and adolescent pregnancy is now expected, with additional 2.5 million girls at risk of such marriage. It's, of course, due to the economic impact of COVID-19 as well, it making it even more difficult in terms of the increased need for aid and assistance alongside with the decreased possibility for many countries to do so. And of course, I'm very happy to be able to say that Norway has stuck with the 1%. And I think for the women, peace and security agenda, which already is an agenda in need for funding, there might be a sort of a double hit by this pandemic, because less money available in general might even mean less money for women peace security on top of that, because there is also the possibility that funding will be prioritized for other needs. So of course we are worried about this development. And I think for everyone, since this pandemic started in early last year, we have been continuously looking for some positive signs. And due to the second wave and the third wave and the fourth wave, we've also been continuously disappointed. So I guess it's hard to stay positive in the long run, but I think it's the only way that we can go forward. And at this point in time, at least, we see that some countries are returning to normal and the vaccine rate is picking up. So hopefully the economy will follow suit and we will be able to go back to normal, or not go back to normal, but say build back better.
I've got a final question, which is something I always ask. Tell us an interesting fact about you that people won't find on Google.
In my spare time, depending on the season, in the wintertime, I ski a lot. So this weekend, I'm going to go skiing as well. So we hike up some mountain and then ski back down again. And in the summertime, I enjoy kiting on the sea. And I guess I'm typically Norwegian. Whenever I have spare time, I want to enjoy the outdoors. I was posted in Rio de Janeiro, and I went hiking there as well. And I remember how some Brazilians would react to this concept of walking up a mountain only to walk down again. And growing up in Norway, you don't really realize how weird it is, right? But you have a day off, and that day you spend walking up a mountain only to walk down again. Yes, I guess we just are weird.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mr. Mundal. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to you too.
You have been listening to She Stands for Peace, the podcast series that explores the state of the women, peace and security agenda in Africa, asking the central question, 20 years after UNSCR 1325, how far have we come? I'm Dr. Yemisi Akimbobola, your host, and this podcast was produced by the United Nations Office to the African Union with the generous support of the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Join me for the next episode with Nicholas Haysom, Special Representative and Head of the United Nations Mission in South Sudan.